Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. So, this is a challenging time. I support the Black Lives Matter movement. I wish that people who supported the types of revolutions that they see in books would behave accordingly now, but to have the privilege to not feel my life is threatened and to be able to talk about the things, about writing and about art and the things we're going to talk about today, that is a privilege. And I just want to acknowledge that before we kind of move forward. Because this is really challenging. I feel very helpless. I don't necessarily know what to do. I know that staying silent is being complicit, and obviously I don't want to do that, but at the same time, I know I have nothing new to contribute to the conversation. So I'm just trying to figure out what ways I can help. We're going to be reading a lot of books by authors of color, by women of color specifically. Our next S.P.E.L.L. read is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. This is a really good time for it, I think. This is going to be a really interesting conversation. It follows basically the storylines of a young Black woman and a older but still fairly young white woman, and kind of two sides of the conversation. It's very interesting because I think you get a good concept of, I think, what's happening right now and what's really, I think, challenging for a lot of people who are in roles of privilege who aren't necessarily acknowledging the truth of their privilege. And I think it's something that's really important. It would have been really important even if this were not happening. And at this point, there's probably even more appropriate, more on the nose books we could read. But this is the one we're going to do, especially because last month we read a book about Blackness from a non-American Black, and now we're going to read from an African-American woman. So that's happening. I'm going to try and compile as many resources as I can. If you want to be helpful, those will all be in the info below. I messaged my friend the other day just to say that I don't really know what to do about politics right now. And then I immediately corrected myself because I was like, well, it's not so much politics. It's just the right to be alive and Black at the same time. And she responded, yeah, like I'm just trying to learn as much as I can about all of this and try to understand this experience. And I do think that, obviously that's only one step, but it's at least something that I can do, is try to understand things so that I can speak more empathetically and intelligently about them. There's a lot of discourse right now, and I think that it is important to at least be educated enough that we can answer questions like, why does this matter? And why do there need to be riots? And is racism real? And is prejudice real? And I think we have to be confident, as, in an effort to be allies. I think we have to be confident about our answers and be able to explain them. So, yeah. Because I definitely understand. My husband is from a rural, very white, extremely homogenous community. So it's difficult to see where they're coming from. I didn't grow up in that environment. I don't know what it's like to have the values that they have, which are not bad values, but they're narrow. And to be able to explain to someone who thinks they're a good person that actually they're not really seeing the full scope of something is very hard. And to do that without being judgmental, even harder, especially because it's so difficult for me to be like, why can't you just see that the world is bigger than you and it's bigger than your community? And just because you don't personally express prejudice on a daily basis doesn't mean that you don't have these prejudices inside you, or that you don't have these, this misinformation that just circulates within the same community that never really ventures outside. So yeah, educating ourselves, I think, is a very important step. And if I find more, I will let you know. I haven't done a lot of writing about race, which I've mentioned before is because I don't feel that I belong anywhere. I mean, the difference between how I feel or what culture I feel I align with versus what people see when they look at me is very stark. Being Filipino is very, it's difficult on its own because there is this very colonialism mindset that it's better to be white. And so it's hard to shake that. And it's also hard to recognize that because other people see me as a woman of color, even though I am not a woman of color the same way a Black woman is, it still does feel different, and kind of identifying how I feel about that. This is something I've never worked with because it feels controversial. It feels touchy. It feels dangerous. I mean, very specifically, people have asked me before, is my Hermione Black or white? And I always say I don't really focus on her skin color because I don't want to get into it. I don't want to take anything away from people who see Hermione as Black. And I also know that I don't write it. If this is the problem with J.K. Rowling's whole thing with this, is that if Hermione were a Black girl, her entire experience would have been different. This isn't something that just doesn't get mentioned. This is something that would have changed her perspective on everything and the way she interacts with people and the way people interact with her. And to add this in as like a layer that could have happened after the fact is not fair and is not an accurate representation of that experience. And because I never feel confident in my ability to write that experience, I've never taken a stand as to, it has never felt like my place to make that decision. But if I'm being honest with you, I have never written a Black Hermione because I've never paid attention to the microaggressions that she probably came across. It's not as if I don't care, but it's an experience that I didn't feel I had a right to embody, and so I never have. And so even if I have never explicitly said I'm writing a white Hermione, I'm not writing a Black one either. I think I can't pretend like I will ever have. It's something I need to understand moving forward, just in terms of creating art. Art is a reflection of who we are, and I just can't dance around this idea anymore. So yeah. As you know, it's a shitty time right now, and I just got let go from my company because of the virus, because of COVID. I'm not a citizen, so I will have to leave the country soon. How do you cope with something that really isn't your fault but feels like it? I can feel my mental health slipping away. This is a really hard question. Much like everything that's going on, everything is so difficult. I mean, this virus is really shedding a light on just so many things that were already wrong in society that are just getting worse. I mean, okay, let's start from the very basic things. This is not your fault. I know that information is harder to internalize than it is to say, but of course this is not your fault. This is so much out of everyone's control, and the problem is that it's revealing just how little control we have, so that you could feel for a long time that you were doing things right and getting rewarded for doing the right things, that you were working hard and getting rewarded for that. But now you're still working hard and you're getting punished incongruously, inadvertently, by something that's happening that's bigger than you. And I understand that there must be a sense of powerlessness there. Maybe recognizing that that's what you feel could be the first step, that you do feel helpless, feeling powerless, feeling like the future is now out of your hands. Obviously, I mean, the difficulty of having to physically uproot your life, that's something that I can't even begin. I can't even begin to know how hard that must be. I think the best thing I can do is tell you that what you're going through sucks. It's bad, it's awful, and it shouldn't be happening to you, and you don't deserve it. And there's not a lot I can tell you that can be helpful, because I think that you have to grieve a little bit. You have to acknowledge that what's happening to you is you're losing the life that you had, and you're gonna go through the stages of grief. And I don't know how long it's going to take to find acceptance, to believe that you couldn't have done anything to stop this from happening. This was out of your control. I don't know what it's going to take to get to that point. Sometimes when you're having this weird sort of like out-of-body powerlessness, helplessness experience, you have to almost become more cerebral. This is what I have to do anyway, to step outside where you currently are and kind of envision this from your future self's perspective and think like, okay, I want to behave so that future me looks back and says, like, you did the right thing. You kept going. You just kept moving forward, and future you is okay. And I know that this is like, You know, I mean, this is why people believe, this is why people want to believe that there is, you know, a predestined fate, that there are soulmates, because taking things out of our hands makes it easier to accept that that things are out of our hands, that there are things like this, that there's nothing we could have done. We could not have been smarter. We could not have been more successful. This is just how things happened. And this is why people want to believe that God has a plan or that the universe has a plan. And if that comforts you, then believe it. Because, I mean, the truth is that it is hard to keep moving forward. There aren't always things to help us. There aren't always, you know, there isn't always something at the end of the road, or we don't know what that thing is yet. We can't see it from where we're standing. Sometimes that's going to happen, and we have to pick ourselves up and keep moving anyway. And I know that that is hard. It is hard to get up in the morning and decide to live your life and keep moving forward. Never feel like that is a given, because it isn't. Because it is brave every single day that you keep going. If it is possible to reward yourself for getting through this, and by getting through it, I mean like literally getting through it. If you make it through today, congratulations. If you make it through tomorrow, you're doing great. You just keep going. The only direction you can go is forward. You can't blame yourself. You can't look back, because you can't change that. As much as I know that this doesn't help you, I can tell you that I'm on your side. I believe that you are going to, you know, believing that something is going to be better is truly the hardest thing you can do. Choosing to believe that there is something that you're working towards, that something good is coming for you. It's hard. It's why it's the same thing, you know, with love. Believing that there is someone for you is just blind. But we do it anyway because we believe that we will be rewarded for that belief. It's this, you know, self-perpetuating cycle of if we wait, something will come to us, and it will have made all of this make sense. And that's what being human is. There's no way to make that easier, but I want you to believe it. I believe it for you. And if that's the only thing I can do is just tell you that I believe that there is something good, that this is part of your story and you have a good story and that story has a happy ending, I believe that for you. So if you can believe it too, then we're in good shape. Okay, how do you cope when you feel like the next chapter or two are going to be boring? I'm stuck getting started on the next chapter because the plot is sort of at a low point where a few things need to get sorted before things start to move again. What do you recommend? Okay, what do I recommend? You gotta overhaul, I think, what you had planned, because if you sense that it's going to be boring and it's your story and you're the one writing it, it's boring. You're gonna have to find a new way to move through the plot. And as for how you do that, let me back up. I do understand what you're saying, that you probably have to set the scene for something in order for a later plot point to come about. And so possibly to your reader, that is going to feel like nothing is happening. But you still have to give the story a sense of motion, which means that you might want to focus on an aspect of a character arc. It's not like emotional development is boring to readers. Most readers are there to connect with characters. They're not there to see what, happens next. This isn't the Fast and the Furious franchise, you know, pretty much when we're reading, I think we can agree that people are in the story because they want to feel connected to something that's in the story. So you can provide a sense of motion, which I think that's what you want to do. You want to make it feel that the story is moving forward. And the ways that you can do that are either by making plot things happen, which sometimes you do. Some of the feedback I got when I was writing the Atlas 6 was, Mr. Blake actually said, there hasn't been any action for a while. He was like, it's not that I'm bored. It's just that, you know, you wrote about all these really great magicians, but they haven't done anything for a while. You've really been focusing on what's happening with their relationships. So I added in a scene. It's actually the scene where they are reinforcing the house's security. to give it a little bit more action. It was also something I probably should have said earlier anyway. It was an aspect of the plot that I hadn't focused on, probably because it felt like that mechanism was going to be difficult to build, and it was. But so yeah, so that's one option, is to actually add something that isn't necessarily part of the overall plot, but still like contributes to it. You feel that something is getting done. In this case, it was just like a sort of, it was almost a subplot, but it felt, because there was action, like it was very plotty. I would love to have a better word for that, but I don't have one. And then your other option is to give it a sense of motion by giving it relationship development, a romantic scene, a friendship scene. I think if you try to think about it as if you are a member of the audience, basically what any audience member wants to find in, you know, a chapter of something or an episode of a TV show or something, we just want a sense of completion. You want a sense that something that we've taken a journey from beginning to end. And I can't say this enough, that how you do this is definitely your decision. But I think you definitely want to focus it on either something happens, like literally something happens. There's a fight scene, I don't know, the characters go somewhere, something where even if it's like a minor subplot that gets wrapped up, it still is like giving the feeling that something has happened. Or you give one of the characters a sense of closure, some sense of development. A romantic scene will often do that. But definitely, if you're feeling that you're bored while you're writing it, stop and reconsider, because if you're bored while you're working, I promise you the audience is bored too. So trust your instincts on that. There are people who sometimes ask me, you know, they say they've worked on a scene and they read through it and they still don't feel good about it. And you kind of get the sense that it's an internal problem. That's like, it's about self-doubt, and they're just not sure whether they've gotten the scene perfect, or it's that aiming for perfection they haven't met. That's a different problem. The problem we're talking about here is literally you're writing it and you're thinking this is boring and nothing's happening. That's a bad sign. So yeah, you want to trust those instincts without letting it meander into self-doubt, which is a separate issue. Hi, Olivie. Whoa, caps, relax. That's funny. I do that all the time. I was curious how you handled working on multiple stories at once. I've got 2 original works and 3 works in progress, and that I'm currently working on. Please help. I always work on a schedule. I am all about schedules. I could never do this if I was just doing it on as whatever I felt. That would never happen. Nothing would get done. It's more like, on Monday, I'm going to do this. On Tuesday, I'm going to do this. Wednesday is the day that I always do this. I think that giving yourself a set schedule also helps put you in the mindset for whatever you're going to work on, which tends to be better. With My Mechanical Romance, which is my most recent completed manuscript, I worked on that Wednesday and Thursday every week. And, you know, those days were my YA rom-com days, and then I have fan fiction days. I have, you know, days when I work specifically on fantasy, or I'm specifically working on something for Which Way magazine. The baseline treatment for mood disorders is schedules. Going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time. Spontaneity is actually very bad for you, just in terms of survival. And I'm not saying you have a mood disorder. I have one, so obviously this is why I behave this way. But it is always better for your performance as a human being and a creator to give yourself constraints. This actually winds up being very simple advice, which is just create a schedule. I decide which thing is most urgent, and I schedule the majority of my time for that thing. And then I have other things that are kind of back burner things, and I'll usually, Fridays are not great writing days for me for whatever reason. So I kind of give myself a free-ish pass on Friday. I'm like, you can either do this or this. Between these 2 back burner projects, which one do you feel like working on? And it's like, oh, that's nice. I gave myself a choice. How freeing. And, you know, inspiration can run wild. Become familiar with scheduling and self-motivation, telling yourself that a specific thing is going to be done by a specific time, and taking that seriously, which is a self-discipline thing. There's a mix here between inspiration and discipline. You obviously can't control inspiration. So you want to do as much as possible to help your muse, which is giving yourself a set time to work on things and following the instructions that you've set for yourself. You know, the bar for being creative is obviously very high, but the bar for just being organized, pretty low. For being motivated, that's like, you can figure that out. And you can base this, you can and you should base this on your own habits. Know when you're productive. And if you don't know, then learn. Track your behavior. I know that sounds crazy, but it will help you to know when you're most productive and when you can take advantage of those times and when you need to give yourself a break. I think for me, I can't just take breaks. If I'm not writing, I lose my mind. So a break for me is just easing up on the deadlines. Lately, I haven't been as religious about when I update things, and it's because it was just too much. It was too stressful. It was too hard to put all this pressure on myself to finish on an arbitrary deadline. So, but rather than telling myself, oh, you don't have to write today, I still write. I just don't have to finish that day. I'm mixing a lot of things. This for me, the discipline is the easy part. Because I have a very harsh inner critic. I have a very harsh inner voice in general, and my inner self gets very disappointed in me very easily. So that's how I can make myself do things, is because if I don't do things, then I hate myself. If your problem is that you have all this inspiration and you're not really managing yourself, then you kind of have to take a step back and decide, what constraints do I have to set in order for me to reach the things that I want to reach. It does require you being a little bit stricter with yourself. But as always, reward yourself when you do something right. So when you give yourself a deadline and you meet that deadline, great, you did it. Feel good about that. Allow yourself to feel good about that. Behave reasonably. Don't tell yourself you're going to work on the same project, for an entire week when you know that there's going to be lots of other stuff floating around in your head. Give yourself permission to work on the thing that's most important or that you most want to get done. And then the reward is you get to work on one of your other projects after that. And you can take a break and kind of live in another world for a little bit. That's how I get through things, because I do definitely get bored if I work on the same project all the time. So hopefully that helps. I'm very hungry. My stomach is growling, so I'm going to go now. But I didn't do a lot this week because I have been revising, but I finished my revisions today, so maybe you'll see me again soon. If I am proof of anything, though, it's that I've said this before and I'm going to say it again, that you can't always project what's going to happen next. You can't just guess what life is going to look like, because surprises happen. I'm very cynical because when I think about what's going to happen, I usually project the worst case scenario. And a lot of times what happens is the worst case scenario. But you never know for sure that's going to happen. Life is very random. And that's the good and the bad, is that life is extremely random. Sometimes things are going to happen to you and you have no control, and there's nothing you can do, and the only thing you can do about it is control the way you react to it, which is hopefully by doing what you can to get through it. That's resilience. That's the thing about you that you need to be proud of, is your resilience. You have to pick yourself up and get through it. But you also can never predict what good things are going to happen. You never know what is going to happen next that is going to actually be the next greatest thing in your life. Things that you would never guess. Your happy ending is probably not something that you can see right now, but it's out there. And on that note, this has been Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you next week.